please help me welcome our first speaker tonight, Dr. Nancy Zare. Give her a big hand.
Do you love stories? I do. When I was a little girl, one of my fondest memories is of my dad when he read to me from the Book of Fairy Tales or Gulliver's Travels. How my imagination would soar and I would paint pictures. I couldn't wait when I babysat to be able to do the very same thing. And I would dramatize the events and I would change my voice because I love to tell stories. But as it turned out, that gift was inherited from my mother, who when she was a child and had to care for her younger siblings, she would occupy them as if she were Scheherazade, and she would make up stories to save her life. Stories can entertain, amuse, make a point, teach a lesson. They can also cripple a young mind that cannot tell the difference between the true from the false. And that's exactly what happened to me. The day was hot and humid, one of those dog days of summer in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, in a neighborhood full of boys, and so hot that patience ran low and irritation was high, and I had nothing to do. I looked around for my brothers. They were 4 and 8 years older than I, and if I could find them, then maybe I could tag along and at least be a nuisance. Now that was something to do. An idea. Oh, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. I ran into the kitchen with the back door slamming behind me. Mommy, come play with me. My mother was on the phone, as she had been every day that summer, talking for hours to family members or friends. And of course, with all that commotion, she looked up, motioned to the receiver next to her ear, and shooed me away. Mommy, I have nothing to do. What do I do? Her eyes narrowed, and again, she beckoned me to leave. Please, Mommy, please. And my mother turned her body away from me. Oh, I was devastated. I fell to the floor, dissolving in tears. And now here comes the story. And I told a whopper at age 5. I said, I am unworthy. Ooh, even today as I utter those words, I feel a pang. And I have to remind myself it's not true. It's just a story I made up at the age of 5. And yet that story has held me captive for decades. And no matter what I did, I couldn't shake it. It hardened into a belief. A few weeks after that incident, I was in school. And my teacher questioned me, why was I absent for 2 days in the middle of the week? You see, we were only one of 3 Jewish families in that school system, and neither she nor I understood the Jewish holidays. And it left me feeling again unworthy. And a couple months later, my father was irate, marching into the school because I came home singing Christmas carols that used the name of Jesus. And so the next time there was a music lesson, I sat down. Oh, again, I felt less than the other children and unworthy. I watched that year as my older brother prepared to get bar mitzvahed. And then 4 years later, the second brother followed in kind. And yet my parents had made it very clear to me that as a girl, at least in our family in that era, no, this was a ceremony strictly for the boys. And again, that feeling that I was unworthy. In school, I excelled. I got straight A's. I garnered much praise and recognition for my academic abilities. I also had artistic and musical talent, and I was even coordinated athletically. Most importantly, I had a warm and generous heart because I volunteered regularly. I raised money for the American Cancer Society. And yet nothing that I did could remove that feeling that I was unworthy. When I got to college, I sought help for myself. And as a young adult, when my marriage was in trouble, both my husband and I, we got individual and couples counseling. After our divorce, I got very active in 12-step recovery program, and I still am today. I read all sorts of motivational literature, listened to inspirational speakers, self-help books. I prayed, meditated. I did alternative and conventional therapies. And still, my self-esteem, to use the words of my mother, was lower than a snake's belly. I stand here today. I am not that woman anymore. So what happened? What changed? Was there some magical moment, some pivotal event? Well, actually, it was everything I've just told you and the power of reframing my story. You know, in 12-step recovery work, we're urged to take an inventory, not just once, but on a daily basis. And each time I do, it gives me the opportunity to examine my thinking, to sort out the true from the false. Not long ago, one of the women I mentor bitterly exclaimed, "Oh, you can't change the past." And I had to gently disagree. And I shared with her the rest of my story, because that summer when I turned 5, my maternal grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. The Big C, it was called in that era. Shh, don't let Grandma know. And while I don't know for a fact, I suspect that my mother's devotion to the phone was her attempt to keep close to her mom and not to push me away. It wasn't about me. And while those events don't change, my interpretation has. And that has changed everything. So as I conclude, let me assure you, I am still a storyteller. Oh yes, I love to dramatize events and change my voice. But nothing gives me more joy today than to work with others and help them untell their story, to reframe it. And together, we can uplift the human spirit and celebrate each person's worthiness. Shalom.
Bostonians have had a chip on our shoulders for years. Well, wake up, Boston. Baseball wouldn't be baseball without the Boston Red Sox. Can you imagine baseball without a World Series? And eons before anyone had ever heard of Silicon Valley, more life-changing and world-changing innovations were born right here than anywhere else. From the first public school, the first public park, the first public library, the first college, the Massachusetts Constitution, the model for the US Constitution, and also democracies worldwide. The first commercial bank, the first surgery with anesthesia that established modern medicine, the first teachers' college. Oh, and there's more. The first bicycle manufacturing facility, the sewing machine. And I think that there's more. In 1903, the Boston Red Sox played the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the Boston Red Sox were called the Boston Americans then. They played the Pittsburgh Pirates in the first World Series, right over on Huntington Avenue, where Northeastern is now. The game of basketball, the sewing machine, the first subway, the safety razor. I could go on and on. Growing up in the Midwest and fascinated by American history, I was drawn to Boston as a living museum of our history. Coming here for school and settling down, years later, I was involved in an effort to capitalize on our history beyond the Revolution. We discovered, as we delved into the decades and centuries, that not only were all of these innovations created here, we discovered there was something indeed that we all know, something very special about Boston. We also discovered that beyond being a center of innovation for 400 years, many of the innovators from Boston or the Boston area were not all men and were not all white. Lewis Latimer was the son of stowaway slaves who grew up in Chelsea. At 16, he joined the Union Navy to fight in the Civil War. After the war, he got a job in a Boston patent law firm where he learned mechanical drawing. He didn't just learn it, he became head draftsman. It was Latimer's patent-ready drawings that Boston University professor Alexander Graham Bell submitted for his invention, the telephone. Later, Latimer went to work for Thomas Edison, and what Latimer brought to Edison was invaluable. Edison's light bulb used a paper filament that only lasted for a few minutes. Latimer was interested in carbons and had already received a patent for a new way of producing carbon filaments for light bulbs. It was Latimer's carbon filament that enabled Edison's light bulb to last for hours. It was Latimer's carbon filament that made the light bulb commercially successful. Latimer went to work for the Edison Electric Company and held key positions for more than 25 years. He's considered one of the top 10 African-American inventors of all times. Decades after his death, finally, in 2006, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Shouldn't children learn about Latimer the way they learn about Bell and Edison? And when we push girls today to go into science and technology, and when after the saga of Flint, Michigan, we hopefully appreciate clean drinking water a little bit more, we should celebrate Ellen Swallow Richards. Ellen Swallow, a Massachusetts native, was the first woman admitted to MIT. The Institute considered it an experiment. This special student graduated in 1873. Not only was she the first woman to graduate from MIT, she was the first American woman to earn a degree in chemistry. Ellen Swallow was passionate about interesting young girls in science. She asked the Boston Women's Education Association to help establish a laboratory at MIT to teach women chemistry. The women's laboratory was set up in a garage next to MIT, which was then in Boston at the corner of Boylston and Berkeley Streets. Ellen Swallow was persistent. I'm not sure that that would be the word that some of the men at MIT would use to talk about Ellen Swallow, but her persistence paid off. And finally, MIT agreed to admit women. They closed the women's laboratory, and they made Ellen Swallow an instructor in 1882. She married Robert Richards, another MIT professor, and they lived in Jamaica Plain near Jamaica Pond and often saw students, hosted students in their home. She didn't just teach. She used her knowledge to improve lives. The Massachusetts Board of Health was concerned about high rates of disease and came to MIT to ask for help. It was Ellen Swallow Richards who analyzed more than 20,000 water samples to identify bacteria. I think about Ellen Swallow Richards often, especially the last few weeks, and the amazing legacy that she paved for women all the way to today. And finally, if you appreciate modern dentistry, and who doesn't, you should know about Dr. George Franklin Grant. But I think you'll remember him for something else. George Grant was 15 when he started as an assistant, an errand boy, in a dental office in upstate New York. He came to Boston, like many African Americans after the Civil War, to seek greater opportunities. As luck would have it, he roomed with a man who lived on Beacon Hill, just down the street from the newly established Harvard Dental School. He got a job there and was invited to be a student. He graduated with honors, only the second African American. He became a renowned expert in treating patients with cleft palate, a socially isolating condition. And he invented and patented a device he called the oblate palate to enable patients with that condition to eat and speak more normally. The dental school asked him to become an instructor, and he became the first African American professor anywhere at Harvard University. But Dr. Grant loved to golf. And in those days, golfers teed off by making little piles of sand to tee the ball off at a higher level. And you can imagine that as a dentist and a dental professor, having sand on his hands all the time would be a problem. So he fashioned a wooden tee, just like the tees that golfers use today. There were some that were made earlier in Britain and Scotland, but they lay flat on the ground and they didn't become popular. Dr. Grant patented his tee in 1899, but he wasn't interested in earning money. He just wanted people to use it. So he made the tees and gave them away. There are so many stories of innovation from those amazing firsts all the way to the present. But what I've come to appreciate and understand is not only the passion that drives innovation, but the perseverance that it takes, and especially for minority and female innovators, these unsung innovators like Ellen Swallow Richards, Louis Latimer, and Dr. George Grant. I think we can appreciate the perseverance that they showed against all odds, and imagine the power of telling that story today throughout our city and those like them. I think it will give us a taste of the magic and the secret sauce of this place that we call home. Thank you.